3 days before Christmas, I came home from the last shift before the holiday and found my entire life stacked on my parents' porch in 7 cardboard boxes from the liquor store. Each one was labeled in my mother's handwriting: kitchen, hers; clothes, hers; miscellaneous, hers. 56 years old, and I had been sorted into 3 categories, none of which was family. My key went into the front door and stopped halfway, like a fork hitting bone. The deadbolt was new, brass, still shiny, still smelling faintly of the hardware store. I had lived in that house for 4 years, taking care of my father after his heart gave out, handing my mother an envelope of cash on the first of every month, and they had locked me out for Christmas the way you lock a shed for winter. Now I am going to make you 3 promises before this story goes one step further, because you deserve to know what kind of night you are settling in for. First, within 72 hours of that porch, I was signing my name into a church cold weather shelter, and the silver-haired stranger who sat down on the next cot had been coming to that exact room one night a year, every single year, for over 40 years, waiting for me. Not for someone like me, for me, by name. And of all the trades God could have chosen to send me that night, she was a locksmith. Second, you are going to find out what my Aunt Verna supposedly stole from this family in 1982, the crime that got her erased before I was old enough to ask questions. And you are going to hear what my father finally confessed about it, with some of the last working words he had left. Third, there is a mantle clock in this story that stopped ticking in 1982 and has sat dead on my mother's mantle for 43 years. And in the last 10 minutes of this story, it is going to start again. And when you find out what was inside it, you may need to set your coffee down. My name is Colleen, I am 56 years old, and I appraise damage for a living for 28 years. It took me until that porch to finally appraise my own. Stay with me. Every box on that porch gets opened tonight. To understand the porch, you have to understand the arithmetic I was raised in. My mother, Eileen, ran our family the way a landlord runs a building. Everything had a rate. Affection was the security deposit, and you never got it back. My brother Barry, 4 years younger, was the unit she never charged. Barry wrecked 2 cars in high school and got a third. Barry flunked out of 2 apprenticeships and got a pickup truck to cheer him up. Barry was, in my mother's phrase, still finding his footing, and he went on finding it, rent-free, for 5 straight decades. And me. I will give you 2 pictures of what I was, and then we will move on, because you have lived versions of this yourself, or you would not be here. Picture 1. I am 10 years old, and my mother is in bed with one of her headaches, and there is a knock at the door, and it is the paper boy collecting. I count out the money from the jar, pay him, mark it in the little book my mother keeps, and bring her the book to check. And my mother looks it over and says, to the ceiling, "Thank goodness one of my children came out responsible." I glowed for a week, friends. I was 10. I did not know yet that in our house, responsible was not a compliment. It was a job posting. Picture 2. I am 16 and Barry, 12, has broken the neighbor's window with a fungo bat. And the neighbor is on our porch, and my mother is apologizing in her church voice. And when the door closes, she turns to me, not to him, to me, and says, "You were supposed to be watching him." I had been at the library. It did not matter. In the Bennett house, whatever Barry broke was somehow always billed to my account. My father, Merle, drove a delivery route for the bakery for 40 years, and he was a kind man in the way a porch light is kind, on, warm, and permanently attached to the house. He never once contradicted my mother in my hearing. He would catch my eye sometimes across the kitchen after one of her rulings and give me a look I spent my whole childhood trying to translate. It took me until this year and one hospital bed to finally get the translation. Hold on, we are getting there. And then there was the closed file. Aunt Verna, my mother's older sister, 7 years ahead of her, my godmother. Though I only know that from the certificate because in our family, Verna was a story with the ending torn out. I have exactly one memory of her that survived. I am about 11 at her workbench somewhere, and there is a wall of clocks behind her, all ticking out of step, and she is showing me the inside of a pocket watch, all those little brass gears, and she says something I did not understand for 45 years. "See, honey, every single piece matters. There is no such thing as a spare part in a clock. Whoever told you different was building something else." A year later, she was gone, erased. And when children asked, and children always ask, the family recited the verdict. 3 sentences long, sanded smooth from use. Verna stole from this family. She took from her own dying mother. We do not speak of her. And there was one piece of physical evidence, one, and it sat in plain sight my whole life. The mantel clock in my parents' living room, a wedding gift to my grandmother in 1948, stopped dead at 10 minutes past 2, sometime in 1982, the same season Verna disappeared from our lives. Nobody ever wound it. Nobody ever fixed it. Nobody ever moved it. It sat on that mantle for 43 years like a headstone, and I grew up believing, without anyone saying it straight out, that the clock had something to do with her, that she had broken something in this family that could not be repaired. I was righter than I knew, friends, and also more wrong than I have ever been about anything. Keep your eye on that clock. Now, let me get you to the porch because it took 4 years to build. 4 years ago, my father's heart quit on him in the bakery parking lot, 2 weeks into his retirement, which is the kind of joke life tells that nobody laughs at. Triple bypass, then congestive failure, then the slow diminishing that families either share or assign. Ours assigned. My mother called me at the office, crying in that careful way she has, where the tears never actually make it into the words, and said, Colleen, we need you. Just until he is stronger, you are the responsible one. And I did what the responsible ones do, and if you are one of us, you already know the checklist. I was 52, divorced a long time, no children, 28 years into a career as an insurance claims adjuster, which means my entire working life was walking into the worst day of a stranger's life with a clipboard and putting a fair number on it. I gave up my apartment because it was just for a few months. I moved into my childhood bedroom, which still had the pennant on the wall. I cut my caseload to stay inside driving distance of his cardiology schedule, and every first of the month, at my mother's suggestion, I handed her an envelope with $980 in cash for the household because, she said, Honey, you eat here, you launder here, and heaven knows the utilities on this old place. 4 years. Do the multiplication if you want. I did eventually on the worst night of my life in a motel parking lot on the back of a pharmacy receipt. $47,000, give or take, into an envelope with no name on it. And here's what I want you to understand about women like me. I was not stupid and I was not asleep. I noticed things. I noticed that in September, Barry started coming around on weekends with a tape measure. And when I asked, my mother said he was pricing out a wheelchair ramp for your father, which would have been touching if my father had needed a wheelchair, which he did not. I noticed in October that the filing cabinet in the den, the one with the house papers, had been reorganized by hands that were not mine, and that the folder marked deed was suddenly thin. I asked my mother about that too, straight out, over the dishes, and she dried her hands, unhurried, and said, Estate planning, Colleen. Your father and I are being responsible. You of all people should appreciate that. You of all people. I wanted on the record that I heard the click in that sentence, the small cold sound of a mechanism I could not see yet. I heard it, and I stayed anyway because my father was down the hall doing his breathing exercises, counting out loud like a boy, and leaving felt like a thing that healthy families would call abandonment. That is the trap, friends, in case anyone has never drawn you the diagram. They bill you like an employee and bind you like a daughter, and whichever one you try to be, you are charged as the other. So, December 22nd. I worked a full day out at a warehouse fire in the county, came home after dark with my thermos still half full of morning coffee, and my headlights swept the porch, and there were the boxes, 7 of them. My whole residency in that house, folded and taped and labeled in the same handwriting that signed my report cards. I stood on that porch for a long moment, genuinely believing, because the mind is merciful, that this was some kind of project, some cleaning frenzy, some misunderstanding with an explanation shaped like my mother's voice. Then I tried my key. Then I rang the bell of the house I had capitalized for 4 years. The door opened 4 inches to the end of a chain that had never been there before, and my mother looked at me through the gap the way you look at a delivery you did not order. Barry and Kim are moving in January 1st, she said. They are going to take over the house and help with your father. It is all arranged and it is for the best, and honestly, Colleen, a woman your age should have her own life. This was a season, not an arrangement. I asked her to run that past me again, slower, because I had been up since 5 and I thought fatigue might be rearranging her words. She did not say it slower, she said it tidier. Behind her, up the staircase, the bathroom light was off, but I could see the shape of my father behind the frosted glass of the landing window, standing very still, the outline of him not coming down. Mark that, friends. Not coming down. I said, Mom, it is 3 days before Christmas. I said, I have given you $980 a month for 4 years. I heard my voice do the thing it does at total loss claims, level, procedural, keep the client calm. And my mother looked at me through that 4-inch gap and handed down the sentence she had been notarizing my whole life. A family is not a charity, Colleen. You, of all people, should know what things cost. Then the door clicked shut, soft as a checkbook closing. And I stood there in the cold with the snow just starting to catch on the box labeled miscellaneous, hers, and the strangest thought floated up through me, calm as a leaf on a pond. She did not even raise her voice. You do not raise your voice at a line item. You just remove it from the budget. What I did not know yet, standing on that porch, was where the house itself had already gone and whose name was already on the deed, and why the whole thing had needed to happen before the first of the year. We will get there. The paperwork always surfaces, friends. I spent 28 years proving that. Here is what the first 72 hours of being discarded actually look like, because the movies get it wrong. It is not dramatic, it is administrative. I loaded 7 boxes into a Buick with a bad alternator and drove to the Wayfarer Inn out on the state road, $64 a night, and I sat on the bed and did what I do professionally. I documented my loss. Checking account, $412 because the envelope had eaten everything else for 4 years, and my last adjusting check had gone to my father's dental bridge in November. My retirement account, respectable and locked behind penalties in a processing window that laughed at the word Christmas. Work, thin, because claims go quiet over the holidays, and my caseload had been trimmed to fit a cardiology calendar. The Buick's alternator, dying, priced at $400, I did not have. On paper, friends, I was a woman with a career, a license, and a middle-class life. In fact, I was 72 hours from a cot, and the distance between those two sentences is thinner than anyone wants to believe. That first morning, I called the police non-emergency line, and I want to tell you about that call, because someone listening needs the information. The officer who met me at the Wayfarer was polite, about 40, and it turned out he had bowled in a league with Barry years back, which he mentioned twice. The way people hand you a small warning wrapped as small talk. He listened to the whole thing and nodded and said, "If you resided there 4 years and got mail there, ma'am, then a lockout like that is not legal. You would likely count as a tenant." And then he said the phrase, and if you have ever been where I was standing, you know the phrase. But it is a civil matter. Civil matter, friends. File, serve, wait for a docket that reopens sometime in January, against your own mother, for the right to re-enter a house that has already been promised to your brother. I called legal aid and got a voicemail with sleigh bells on it. Closed until January 2nd. I called my oldest friend from the office, and she had her mother-in-law in the guest room and a hospital bed in the dining room for her husband's father, and her voice got small with a shame that was not hers to carry, and I told her truthfully that I would be fine, and we both pretended to believe me. And no, before anyone asks, I could not just force my way back in. Breaking a lock on a door you are not deeded to is a misdemeanor, and I had a professional license that feeds me, and more than that, my father was behind that door with a heart that failure had already sanded down to tissue paper. Whatever a locksmith and a shouting match would have set off in that living room, he would have been the one lying on the floor while it happened. I had spent 4 years keeping his systolic pressure boring. I was not going to be the reason it spiked on Christmas week. So I did the thing that still astonishes me when I say it out loud. I behaved. I waited politely, like a good girl, while the water came up the steps. On the morning of December 24th, the Wayfarer's manager met me at the desk apologizing to a spot just over my shoulder. A regional youth hockey tournament, rescheduled after a rink failure 2 towns over, had taken every room he had and every room in the county with it. He could not extend me. He was sorry. He gave me a coupon, friends. 10% off a future stay. I have kept it. Some artifacts you frame. The Buick chose the Wayfarer parking lot to finish dying, with a click and then a silence that sounded exactly like that front door. The buses in our county stop at 5 on Christmas Eve. The temperature had been dropping all day like something with its rope cut, and the radio was using the phrase Arctic event, and I sat in a dead car wearing 3 shirts under my good work coat, doing arithmetic in a spiral notebook until the cold made my handwriting look elderly. I washed up at the YMCA and told the girl at the desk I had been traveling, and she was 19, and let me believe she believed me, which is a mercy I have not forgotten and will not. And at 4:30, walking to the gas station for coffee, I saw it. A sheet of orange paper stapled to the laundromat corkboard, hand-lettered in marker, the ink gone sideways where the hand got cold. Warming shelter tonight, Deer Creek Methodist Fellowship Hall. Doors at 7, all welcome. All welcome, even apparently the responsible one. I stood across the street from that fellowship hall in a 9-degree wind for longer than I will ever admit to anyone but you and God. The windows had that deep amber church basement glow, and through them I could see folding tables and coffee urns and a man in a Santa hat carrying an armload of blankets, and I stood in the dark negotiating with a door. Because I had walked into 600 disasters in my career with a clipboard and a company jacket, and I knew exactly to the decimal how I had classified the people on the other side of the clipboard. Kindly, professionally, and from above. Walking through that door meant reclassifying myself permanently in my own files. There is a specific pride, friends, that freezes women like me to death within sight of a warm window, and I had it in my hand like a boarding pass, and what saved me was my own trade. I heard myself say out loud in the empty street, in the voice I use on hysterical claimants, "All right, ma'am, let's assess." The building is heated, you are not. Coverage applies. And I crossed. Inside it smelled like coffee and wet wool and somebody's cinnamon crock pot, and a man with a clipboard, there is always a clipboard, smiled at me with no flicker of anything and asked for a name for the sign and sheet. And I gave him my family's name, and it only cracked once in the middle. Colleen Bennett. Cot 9, against the east wall under a paper snowflake some Sunday schooler had scissored with more love than symmetry. There were maybe 24 of us that night. An old man whose cough I did not like, a young mother with a toddler who kept escaping his blanket like a magician, a quiet man in a work coverall who slept sitting up with his boots on, which tells you things about the places he had slept before. Volunteers in reindeer sweaters moved between the cots with cocoa, and somewhere around 8 o'clock the toddler's mother started singing to him, low, and half the room pretended not to listen. And everybody listened. I lasted maybe half an hour as a guest. Then I saw a volunteer at the donation table drowning in a mountain of donated coats with no system to them, and my body simply stood up and went. Because being useful is my resting pulse, it is the oldest setting I have. I sorted coats by size for an hour. I found the old man a scarf and made him promise, with the toddler as my witness, to see the free clinic Friday about that cough. And somewhere in there, folding a child's snowsuit, I felt the difference for the first time in my life. Felt it in my hands, between being useful because it is yours to give, and being useful because you are terrified of what happens to your seat at the table the day you stop. Nobody in that room had billed me anything. I went back to cot 9 with that thought sitting in my chest like a swallowed coin, and that is when the woman with the keys sat down on cot 8. I had noticed her earlier the way you notice competence. Silver hair cropped short, hands like a rancher, 70-something, moving through the room, refilling urns and squaring blanket corners, with a big ring of keys on her belt that jingled when she knelt. I had filed her as the volunteer who runs things. Every operation has one. She handed me a paper cup of cocoa I had not asked for, sat down on the next cot like we had known each other 30 years, and watched the toddler perform his blanket escape for a while. Then she said, not looking at me, "I did not catch your name earlier." "Colleen," I said. "Colleen Bennett." Friends, I want to describe to you exactly what happened next, because I have replayed it more times than any moment of my life. She went still, not startled. Still, the way machinery goes still when the current stops. Then she set her own cocoa down on the floor, slow and level, the way you set something down when your hands have just stopped being trustworthy. And she looked at me, at my eyes and my jaw and my hairline, the way you read a map you already know by heart, and she laughed. One note, up out of her chest with 40 years of weather in it, and her eyes filled straight up. And she said, "Bennett, Colleen Verna Bennett, born in March, christened at St. Aidan's. Your godmother held you at the font, and your mother would not stand next to her for the photograph." The room went on around us, cocoa steam, the toddler's third escape, somebody tuning the radio to carols, and I sat on cot 9 with my whole scalp gone cold because my middle name is Verna, and I have hated explaining it my entire life, and nobody outside a courthouse has spoken it out loud in decades. I asked her in the flattest voice I own who she was, and she wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, and she straightened up, and she said, "My name is Frankie Deal. I am a locksmith, retired mostly. And 43 years ago, your Aunt Verna, the finest friend I ever had, gave me a key and a job. And the job was this. One night, a year, every Christmas Eve, wherever the cold weather shelter is in this town, you be in it. Pour cocoa, sort coats, watch the door." And Frankie Deal looked at me across the gap between two cots and delivered the sentence that broke my life in half, gently, the way you deliver a verdict you have prayed against. Because one Christmas, Frankie, one of these years, my sister is going to finish with that girl. And when this family finishes with someone, it is always winter. And she will come to where the coats are, and I need somebody standing there when she does. 43 Christmas Eves, friends. This woman had poured cocoa in church basements since before I had a mortgage, one night a year, on the word of a friend who had been dead for 7 of those years, and I had walked in on number 43. Now, if you have been sitting with me this whole time, the porch, the boxes, the coupon, the door I almost could not walk through, do me one kindness before the next part, because the next part is why this story exists at all. If you have ever been the responsible one, the strong one, the one your family calls first and thanks last, tell me where you are listening from tonight. Down in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and this community is full of us, and none of us are as alone as our families let us feel. Press the like button so this story finds the next woman standing outside a warm window, and subscribe because you are about to open a floor safe that was locked in 1983, and what my aunt left inside it took me the rest of this story to fully understand. All right. Frankie's hands were shaking too much to drive that night, she said, which I believe the way you believe a kind lie. And so we talked until the shelter dimmed its lights, and I did what I do, friends. I audited her. I asked her flat questions with known answers because I had spent a career across the table from fraud, and a stranger in a shelter producing a dead relative and a mysterious bequest is not a miracle. It is a Tuesday in elder scams. She did not miss once. She knew my middle name and the reason for it. My grandmother had insisted on it over my mother's objection 1 week before the christening. She knew about the pocket watch afternoon, the wall of unsynchronized clocks, because Verna had told her about it the way other women describe a grandchild's first steps. And she knew one thing that ended the audit because no one alive should have known it. She knew that the last time I ever saw my aunt, at 11 years old, Verna had pressed something into my coat pocket in the driveway, and my mother had found it that night and taken it, and I had cried myself sick and been told I was too old for such theater. A butterscotch tin, Frankie said, watching my face, with a brass gear inside it, off a 1948 movement. She kept the receipt from the candy store, honey. She kept everything. That is how I knew, friends. Not the photograph she showed me later, not the paperwork. The butterscotch tin. Some facts only live in two hearts. And when a stranger hands you one across a church basement at midnight, you are not being conned. You are being found. The day after Christmas, Frankie drove me 30 miles to Granite Falls in a truck older than both of us, to a storefront on Depot Street with soaped windows and a painted sign gone pale as a watermark. Bennett Clock and Watch. Repairs while you wait. My aunt had not fled the county in 1982, friends. She had moved 30 miles. She had opened a shop with her own name on it, my name on it, and run it for 36 years, 2 doors down from Frankie's lock shop, and raised no family, and kept no grudge that anyone ever heard her speak, and died in 2018 with her ledger current and her rent paid up like the whole quiet life had been one long alibi nobody ever came to check. 30 miles, friends. My family had erased a woman who lived 30 miles away. You do not need distance to disappear somebody. You only need to own the story. The lawyer's office was above the old bank, and the lawyer was a woman younger than my career, a Ms. Okafor, who had inherited the file from her retired senior partner with, she said, the most specific instructions of her professional life. The Verna Bennett Trust, established 2005. Inside it, the Depot Street building, shop below, apartment above, owned free and clear since 1991. An account holding $16,300, what remained after the trust had quietly paid the building's taxes and insurance for the 7 years since her death. And a release condition, friends, and I want you to hear it in full, because when Ms. Okafor read it out loud, I had to hold the arm of the chair. Distribution shall be made to my grandniece and goddaughter, Colleen Verna Bennett, only upon the attorney's reasonable satisfaction that she is no longer residing under the roof, nor dependent upon the household, of my sister Eileen. If this condition seems cruel, tell her the following. Anything given sooner would have been converted. I have watched the machine run for 50 years. It only releases a person when she stops producing. I am sorry, and I am not wrong. I sat in that office and argued with a dead woman, silently, for about 90 seconds, and then I ran the honest experiment, the one my aunt had clearly run before me. Suppose the letter had come 5 years ago, when I still had my apartment, my full caseload, my seat at the Sunday table. Suppose a lawyer had called to say a building and some money were mine from the aunt who stole. I knew exactly what would have happened, friends, and so do you, because you know my mother now. There would have been a family meeting. There would have been the phrase, after what that woman did to us, the least she owes this family. There would have been Barry's footing to fund and my father's heart to invoke, and there would have been me, the responsible one, converting my inheritance into everyone's arrangements and feeling almost noble for a month. My aunt had not put a condition on her love. She had rated the hazard correctly and written the policy accordingly. 28 years in insurance, friends, and the best underwriting I ever saw was done by a clockmaker. Then Frankie stood up and took the big ring off her belt and worked one key loose, a stubby brass one, worn shiny at the shoulders, and set it in my palm and closed my fingers over it with both her hands. In 1983, I installed a floor safe under her workbench, she said. Best unit I ever set, if I say so. She kept the only other key her whole life, and when she passed, the instructions said I was to carry this one until I could hand it to you myself. Honey, I have carried your safe on my hip for 43 years. It is heavier than it looks. The shop, when we unlocked it, had that particular stillness of a room where the last person to touch everything loved it. Workbench oiled, tools on their shadow board, every silhouette filled, a wall of clocks, all stopped, which Frankie said the neighbor boy had been paid to let wind down after the funeral, because Verna held that a ticking clock in an empty room is a lie. And under the workbench, beneath a plank you would never notice, the safe. The key turned like it had been waiting, which friends it had. Inside there were three things: a shoebox of cassette tapes, 36 of them, labeled in a draftsman's hand, one for every year from 1982 to 2018, each one marked with the same two words and a date. For Colleen, a manila folder, thin, tied with string, and on top of everything, in an envelope, a letter, and I am going to give you the heart of it now, though I did not read it until that night, alone, upstairs in her apartment, under a quilt that still smelled faintly of cedar. She told it without one drop of self-pity. How in 1982, when their mother, my grandmother, was dying, the estate money, $4,000 in a passbook meant to bury her and settle her debts, went missing. How Eileen stood up at the kitchen table in front of the aunts and the pastor and accused her sister. How the numbers had a story to tell and nobody asked to hear it because Verna was the odd one, the unmarried one, the one with machine oil under her nails, and Eileen was the one who had nursed their mother, and grief needs a villain the way a clock needs a spring. And then the lines I will be able to recite on my own last day. I did not take the money, Colleen. I know who did, and I knew within the month because banks keep records and I have never in my life been afraid of paperwork. I said nothing, then or ever, for one reason. Our mother, on her last clear evening, took my hand and asked me not to burn the family down over money, whatever I learned. So I let them keep the story, and I kept the receipts, and I kept your birthdays, everyone on the tapes in this box. People are like clocks, honey. Your family will tell you that you are broken. You were never broken. You were only unwound. Wind yourself. Keep your own time, Verna. The manila folder, friends. I opened it at her workbench with hands I kept steady out of respect, the way I open findings that end somebody's version of events. A photostat of the passbook page, 1982, showing the $4,000 withdrawal 10 days before my grandmother died, and the withdrawal slip beside it, signed in an even, careful, familiar hand. Eileen Bennett. And one more document, older, a carbon of a real estate closing from the spring of 1983, the down payment on my parents' house on Linden Street, the house I was locked out of 3 days before Christmas, the house with the new brass deadbolt, had been $3,900 cash. Sit with me right here a moment, friends, because I had to sit too. For 43 years, my mother kept a dead clock on her mantel as a monument to her sister's crime, and the mantel it sat on, the wall behind it, the door with the chain, the porch where my life stood in boxes, all of it had been bought, the whole time, with the money her sister was accused of taking. They did not just erase an innocent woman, they lived inside the evidence. I spent that dead week between Christmas and New Year's upstairs in the apartment, working through the tapes in order on Verna's own machine. An hour a night, my aunt's voice filling a kitchen she had left exactly neat. The early ones undid me the worst. Tape, 1983, her voice younger, closer to the wound. Happy 12th birthday, Colleen. I drove past the school in October and watched you all get on the buses. You have your grandmother's walk, that no-nonsense walk. Frankie says I should not do the drive-bys, that they will call it something ugly if anyone notices. Let them. A godmother has a job. She knew my spelling bee results, friends. She knew when I made honor society, when I married, when I divorced, what year I made senior adjuster, because Frankie clipped the Deer Creek paper for her every week for decades, and the two of them read my little life out loud to each other over lunch like a cereal. And tape 1998 stopped me cold because it was not about her at all. They will have made you the responsible one by now, she said. I can hear it from 30 miles away. Listen to me, honey. In that family, responsible is not a virtue, it is a harness. Watch what happens the first time you set down the load. Whoever still loves you standing empty-handed, that is your family. I am betting there will be fewer of them than you think, and I am betting one of them pours cocoa. Friends, I sat in her kitchen and laughed and cried at the same time, which I have since decided is the sound the truth makes when it finally clears customs. January, I got practical, because practical is my first language. I moved into the apartment above the shop properly, transferred my adjusting license address, bought Frankie's nephew's old pickup for $1,100, and learned which stair creaked. I told nobody in my family where I was, not as a tactic, friends, but because for the first time in 56 years, I had an address with no arithmetic attached to it, and I wanted to live at it for a minute. In a county like ours, I got 11 days. A woman from Deer Creek Methodist recognized me at the Granite Falls hardware store, buying, of all things on this round earth, a new lock for the shop's back door, and by the following week, the phone tree had processed, cross referenced, and delivered its finding to my mother's kitchen. Colleen is living at that woman's shop. Did you even know Verna had a shop? On a Tuesday evening, my phone lit up with Mom, and I stood at Verna's front window watching it ring against the glass. 3 rings, 4, while the streetlight came on outside, and then I answered. Because some appointments you keep just to take the measurements. Her voice came out in a register I had not heard since childhood fevers. Warm, melted all the way through. Sweetheart, Christmas got completely away from everyone, she said. Feelings ran high, mistakes were made on all sides. You know how your brother's move had us all upside down. Come home, honey, we are family. I did the thing I do now, automatic as breathing. I listened past the upholstery for the frame, and I marked the exact second the ledger poked through. It took under 2 minutes. Because after come home and we miss you and your father asks about you, there came a small business-like downshift, the sound of pleasantries being cleared like dishes. And she said, and sweetheart, while we are all mending fences, we should sit down as a family and talk about that building you have come into. Commercial property is a burden for one person, and heaven knows this family could put it to use. There it was, friends. 11 days, and the appraisal was already done. I asked her one question. I kept my voice at exactly the temperature of a claims interview, no edge, no tremor, a thermometer of a question. Mom, where did the down payment for Linden Street come from? In 1983? The line went so quiet I could hear her wall clock. Not the mantle clock, friends. That one has not made a sound since 1982. The little plastic one in the kitchen, ticking like a nervous witness. Then she said, we will talk soon, sweetheart, and love to you. And the line clicked, soft, soft as a checkbook closing, and I stood there and noted, for the file, that she had never once asked where I slept on Christmas Eve. It had not come up. My niece Sadie is Barry's daughter, 24, a dental hygienist with her mother Kim's work ethic, and God help her, my knack for noticing, and she is the only member of my family who has ever texted me like a person instead of a summons. She called that same week, talking low from her car, and gave me the rest of the picture, the part the phone tree left out. The Linden Street house had been deeded to Barry in October, before the porch, before the boxes, the whole arrangement notarized while I was driving their father to cardiology. Barry had already borrowed against it by Thanksgiving because Kim's boutique was underwater, and his landscaping trailer had been repossessed, and the retirement condo my parents had reserved out by the golf course, the one this entire shuffle was supposed to fund, had quietly fallen through when the bridge loan did. They were all still in the Linden Street house, friends, my parents, Barry, Kim, stacked on top of each other with a mortgage where a paid-off house used to be, and the story going around the family, Sadie reported, apologetic, like she was handing me something with an edge, was this. Colleen came into secret money from crazy old Verna and abandoned her sick father. So that was the machine, and I finally saw it whole, gears and all. I had not been thrown out in a fit of temper. I had been liquidated calmly, in the correct order, an asset cleared off the books before the reorganization, exactly the way you empty a property before the appraiser walks it. And the reorganization had then collapsed on schedule, because it was engineered by people who had never once in their lives been made to balance to the penny. You cannot hate a spreadsheet, friends, but you can decline to be a cell in it. Late that night, my phone rang again, and the screen said, Dad, and my heart did something complicated, because my father had not independently operated a telephone since the second hospitalization. I picked up and heard the long, effortful breathing first, the sound of a man hauling each word up a staircase. Your aunt, he said. Long pause. Fixed my watch once. Never charged me. Another pause. Longer. Don't you sell her shop. Then the call ended, or the phone slipped, or someone came into the room. I will never know which. I stood in Verna's kitchen, holding the phone with both hands. Friends, the way you hold something warm in winter. It was not an apology. It was 11 words. But graded on the curve of a silent lifetime, and it was the Gettysburg Address. 2 days later came the envelope, thick cream paper, my mother's even hand, a printed card. New Year, new beginnings, family dinner at our house, Sunday at 6. Please come, Colleen. All is forgiven. All is forgiven. Friends, I read that card 4 times, and I want you to notice what my mother had done with the grammar, because it is the whole woman in 3 words. All is forgiven. By her. Of me. The porch, the boxes, the deadbolt, the $412, the cot, and I was the one holding the pardon. Frankie read the card on my counter without touching it, the way she looks at a lock somebody has scratched up trying to pick, and said, That is not a dinner, honey. That is a closing. They will have paperwork somewhere in the house. Watch for a folder. and I went anyway. I want to be honest with you about why, because this channel does not deal in fairy tales. I did not go to face them down, armored and finished. I went because I am 56 years old and some ancient 10-year-old in me heard all is forgiven and sat up like a dog at a can opener, because being wanted back, even as inventory, still rings the oldest bell in the house. Wanting your family to want you is not a character flaw, friends. It is just the most expensive thing I have ever owned. But I had changed in one way I could measure. I brought nothing they could deposit. No checkbook, no documents, no decisions. I brought a pot of Frankie's chili for the table, and I drove the 30 miles with it warm on the floor of the truck, and I parked outside the house my aunt's stolen reputation had paid for, and I rang the bell of my own childhood one more time. The chain was off. The new deadbolt let me straight in. Funny what unlocks friends once you have something they want. They were lovely for 20 minutes, and I gave them that, counted it, because it makes what happened at minute 21 easier to believe, not harder. Kim hugged me at the door. Barry called me sis, which he does at funerals and loan applications. My father sat in his recliner by the window, smaller than November, his walker parked beside him like a patient animal, and when I kissed his cheek, his good hand found my wrist and pressed twice, deliberate like a code he trusted me to break. And on the mantel behind him, the clock stopped at 2:10, presiding over the room like it had for 43 years. The house had been bought with the lie, friends, and the lie kept time in it. 10 minutes past 2, forever. Then the plates were cleared, and my mother set her coffee down with the little click that has called that family to order for half a century, and Barry, on cue, went out to the sideboard and came back with a folder. Blue, the realtor's logo in the corner. A comparative market analysis, friends, for a commercial property on Depot Street in Granite Falls, with a suggested listing price highlighted in yellow. They had appraised my aunt's shop before inviting me to dinner. Do not let anyone ever tell you my family lacks diligence. It simply only ever points one direction. Your father needs real care, my mother said in her reasonable voice, the one that arrives pre-offended by any answer but yes. More than Kim can manage with her back, more than I can do at my age. That building is just sitting there, Colleen. Verna was family, whatever else she was. She would want it to take care of family. We sell it, we set your father up properly, we put a little right what she put wrong all those years ago, and everything finally goes back to normal. Heads nodded around my mother, the way they have nodded around her since Eisenhower. And I asked quietly what normal meant exactly. And she smiled at me like I had finally asked a smart question. You come home, sweetheart. There is room again now that things are settling. You help with Daddy, nights mostly. You have always been so good with him. And we put this whole sad chapter and that woman's name behind us for good. Friends. They wanted the building her lie had never managed to buy, to finish paying for the house her lie already had. And they wanted me back on nights. The complete set. I set my fork down, and I remember the tiny bell sound it made on the plate, because the room had gone church quiet, waiting for the responsible one to say what she was for. And I heard my own voice come out exactly the way it comes out at a total lost sight, level, kind, and without 1 inch of give in it. No. The shop is not for sale. Not tonight, not ever. And my aunt's name is not a chapter this family gets to close, because this family never once read it. And then I gave them what I had actually come to give because I had spent January getting it ready, the way I get ready for a hearing. I told them I had toured the cardiac care wing at Cedar Ridge and 2 other facilities in January before any of this, because I had read Dad's discharge notes for 4 years and I could do the arithmetic on where his heart was headed. I told them his Medicare picture, his supplement, the waiver program he qualified for, all of it was already assembled in a folder in my truck, and that I would file every page myself. I told them I would be his advocate on every chart, at every care conference, first call on every form, every Tuesday, forever, for free. You get my head, I said, and you get my hands, for him, until the day he is done needing either one. What you do not get, ever again, is the envelope. Not the building, not the trust, not my address, and not me on nights. The house made a sound like a fault line, friends. Kim actually stood up after everything your mother has been through. Barry said something about family that I promise you he could not have spelled. My mother went pale, then wet-eyed, in one practice motion, like weather changing on a stage. Only my father did not move. My father was looking at the mantel clock. I gathered my coat and thanked Kim for the dinner, which was true, the roast was fine, and I left the chili, and I got as far as the porch, the same porch, the boards where the boxes had stood, when my mother came out after me, alone, pulling the door to behind her. And here is where I have to slow this story down, friends, because what happened next on that porch is the reason my aunt kept receipts for 40 years. My mother stood under the porch light in the cold with her arms crossed, and she skipped every intermediate weapon, the tears, the scripture, the sick father, all of it, and went straight to the one sentence that has governed every Bennett woman since 1948. She said, "If you walk off this porch with that woman's property in your pocket, then you are no daughter of mine, and this family will close over you like water. And in 1 year, Colleen, I promise you, no one will even say your name." Like it closed over Verna, I said. The porch light hummed. And my mother. Friends, my mother did not flinch, and that is when I knew for certain she had known all along, every year of it, because innocent people flinch at that name. Bookkeepers do not. Exactly like that, she said. So I took out the photostat. I had carried it flat in my coat pocket for 6 weeks. Friends, not as a weapon, I want to be honest, more the way you carry a saint's medal, and I unfolded it under the porch light, the passbook page, and the withdrawal slip, October 1982, $4,000, and the signature at the bottom in handwriting, so even it could have taught school. Hers. I did not say anything. 28 years of claims work teaches you that a document reads best in silence. I watched my mother look at her own name, and I watched 43 years of story go off its foundations behind her eyes, and the only thing that moved on her face was her mouth, which got smaller, the way a drawstring closes. And what she finally said, friends, standing on the porch her sister's ruin had paid for, was this. I nursed our mother for 2 years alone while Verna played with clocks. Somebody owed me something. Not, I am sorry. Not, how long have you known? Somebody owed me something. The whole religion, friends in 5 words, spoken plain at last on a cold porch by its founding treasurer. And here is what happened inside me, and I want to tell it straight because this is the part I did not expect. I did not hate her. I stood there and I finally saw her whole. A woman who at 23 had been handed a bedpan and a promise, who nursed her mother down to the grave while her big sister was allowed a trade and a shop and a life, and who came out of those 2 years so certain the world ran on invoices that when nobody paid hers, she paid it herself, out of the estate, and let the family bury her sister instead of the debt. Somebody had taught her the arithmetic first. Friends, somebody always taught them first. That is the oldest gear in the machine. Understanding it did not reopen my door, and it did not unsay Christmas. But it lowered my fists, and it clarified my aim, and there is more mercy in accurate aim than in all the shouting on earth. I said, "Good night, Mom," and I folded the paper away, and I walked off the porch, and behind me I heard the new deadbolt turn. And friends, for the first time in my life, that sound had nothing in it for me at all. It was just a lock, closing on a house full of people who had finally heard the truth and would now begin the long work of not having heard it. The smear arrived on schedule by Monday because my mother is nothing if not punctual. Colleen has been poisoned against the family by that woman's money. Colleen showed up to a reconciliation dinner and attacked her grieving mother with forged papers. 2 aunts went quiet on me mid-text thread like roads washing out. The church casserole network reclassified me inside a week, and I would love to tell you it all bounced off, friends, but I am the one narrating, so you get the truth. Every hit landed. At 3 in the morning, in my aunt's apartment, with the wind off the ridge working the shutters, the old wiring in me would light up and start drafting surrenders. If I just signed the listing, if I just went back on nights. Her voice would go warm again by Easter, and warm was the drug, friends, warm was always the drug. Being needed had been my rank, my salary, and my face for 56 years, and quitting it did not feel like freedom at 3 a.m. It felt like withdrawal, tooth by tooth. On the worst of those nights, I did the only thing that ever helped. I wrote to my father, large print for his reading eye, 1 page, where Cedar Ridge was, what the folder said, what Tuesdays would look like, my new phone number in numerals an inch tall. And at the bottom, Dad, I am not gone. I am just done being the budget. Love, Colleen. I mailed it on a Thursday. 9 days later, it came back to my box in Granite Falls, unopened, my own handwriting on the front, and across it, in that even, careful, familiar cursive, 2 words. Return to sender. I stood at the mailboxes on a gray February afternoon with the ridge wind coming down the street, holding letter number 1 of my own collection, and I understood that I was now living inside my aunt's biography, 1 generation on, same hand, same 2 words, same job that hand had always done, standing between a Bennett and anyone who loved her for free. I did not cry, friends. That account had been drawn down years ago. I drove home, and I noticed the word home settle onto Depot Street as I said it. and I climbed the stairs and I put my returned letter in the floor safe, on top of Verna's folder, where it fit, friends, the way the last gear fits a movement. And I thought, all right, now it is finished. Now I know the whole shape of it, and nothing left in this story can surprise me. The phone rang 11 days later on a Friday night in late February, and it was Sadie, and she was crying before my name was all the way out of her mouth. Grandpa fell, she said. His heart went into something. They used the paddles in the ambulance, Aunt Colleen. He is at County General, and Grandma is telling the doctors that his daughter is a nurse practically, and that the family plan is for him to come home to family. I drove the 30 miles south with the roads black and shining, and I used every one of those miles to settle who was going to walk through those doors. Because two different women had learned to drive on those roads. Friends. One of them was the responsible one, arriving to be spent, the way she had arrived her whole life. The other one had an address with no arithmetic on it, a floor safe with the truth in it, and a dead clockmaker's voice in her ear. Wind yourself. Keep your own time. I parked, and I walked into County General as both his daughter and a professional with 28 years of reading systems, and God help anyone who planned on collapsing the two. He looked small in the bed. Smaller than the porch had made him, smaller than the recliner. The stroke of luck, the doctors said, was that Barry had been home when he went down. The rest was not luck. Heart failure had moved into its last neighborhood. His kidneys were tired of the argument, and he would not be climbing the Linden Street stairs again. Not now. Not ever. He needed skilled care, around the clock, cardiac trained, or a home converted into a ward with a hired staff nobody in that family could fund. Through the glass of the family lounge, I watched my mother watching me talk to the cardiologist. And I want to be fair one last time, friends, because fairness is the spine of this story. Some of what was in her face was fear for her husband of 57 years, real fear, the kind I have stood next to at 100 bedsides. But moving over the top of it, steady as a carriage return, was the other thing, the counting thing. And by then, I could read it the way Frankie reads a keyway. The asset had entered the building. The plan could proceed. The discharge planning meeting was Monday morning, third floor conference room, and the hospital social worker, a tired, decent woman about my age, told me on the phone, carefully, that the family had specifically requested my attendance. Of course they had, friends. You do not hold the reading of the will without the estate present. The room had a long table, a box of tissues, and a wall clock that actually ran, which I took as an omen. Present, the social worker, a discharge planner with a laptop, Kim, my mother, and me. Barry was parking the car, which took him the entire meeting, and Sadie had asked to come and been told it was for decision makers. The clinical picture came first, laid out gently, and it was what I already knew. Skilled nursing, cardiac program, not a spare bedroom, not a recliner, not good intentions, a facility or a funeral measurably sooner. And then my mother folded her hands on that table, and I watched her arrange her face into its reasonable setting, the one that has closed every deal of her life, and she presented the family plan to the professionals like a woman unveiling a kindness. My daughter, she said, gesturing at me, warm as a heat lamp, has a large property over in Granite Falls, a whole commercial building, half of it standing empty. She cared for her father for 4 years. She is better than any nurse. Everyone says so. He would be with family in family hands, and everyone knows family care is the best care. It is all quite settled, except the details. The discharge planner, God bless her literal heart, actually began to type. And my mother turned to me, in front of the professionals, with the whole voltage of 56 years behind her eyes, and she said it. The sentence she had been laying track toward since I was 10 years old, with the paper boy's money counted out in my hand. You are the responsible one, Colleen. This is what you are for. And friends, I heard it. I heard the tape hiss underneath her voice, 1998, a clockmaker 30 miles away speaking into a cassette recorder to a niece she was not allowed to see. In that family, responsible is not a virtue, it is a harness. Watch what happens the first time you set down the load. I turned to the social worker first because the professionals in that room deserved a clean record, and every syllable of what I said next went in level, documented, and on purpose. I said, for this meeting's notes, the plan you have just heard has exactly one load-bearing wall, and it is me, and I am informing this table plainly, I decline. I said, a single untrained caregiver alone cannot deliver round-the-clock cardiac care in a walk-up apartment, and every professional at this table knows it. That plan does not serve the patient. It consumes the caregiver and then fails the patient anyway, in that order. And I have adjusted enough claims at houses where a family tried it to know exactly what the last day of that plan looks like. The discharge planner stopped typing, And then I turned to my mother, and I gave her the rest in the gentlest voice I own, which after this winter is very gentle indeed, friends, the way floodwater is gentle once it has finally gone still. I toured Cedar Ridge in January, I said, before Christmas ever happened, because I read Dad's charts for 4 years and I could see where the road went even while everyone at your table was measuring the house for Barry. The cardiac wing has a bed. His paperwork is in my truck, complete. I will file it Wednesday. I will sit on every care conference. I will be first call on every chart. I will be there every Tuesday until there are no more Tuesdays, and it will cost this family nothing because it was never for sale. He gets my head in my hands for free for the rest of his life. You get nothing further, Mom. Not the building, not the envelope, not me on nights. The harness is retired. My mother's voice started up the register I grew up under, after everything, and selfish, and your own father, and friends. The older I get, the more clearly I hear what shouting actually is. It is a ledger being read aloud by someone who has just discovered the debtor moved and left no forwarding address. I let it break over me like weather, because that is all it has ever been. And when it passed, my mother stood, gathered her coat and her purse with the composure of a woman who has never once left a room she did not own, and she looked down at me, and she handed down the last ruling of her administration. Then I have one child, she said, measured, final, almost calm. And she walked out, and Kim rose and followed her on the beat, like the second hand follows the minute, and the door side shut, and the wall clock ticked, and the box of tissues sat there unbothered, having seen this room before. And into that ringing quiet, the social worker, that tired, decent woman, slid a single form across the table to me and said, in the softest bureaucratic mercy I have ever received, the county requires one point of contact for all his care decisions going forward. Whom should I list? I looked at the door my mother had gone through. Then I printed my name in the little box, Colleen Verna Bennett, and my number, and under relationship I wrote daughter, and my hand was steady the whole way through, friends, and I want the 3 a.m. version of me on the record about that. Both things happened at that table, and I signed for both. I became the person my father's life now runs through, and I stopped forever being a line in my mother's books. I did not leave the building. There was one visit left, and I rode the elevator up and sat down next to my father's bed in the 2 a.m. quiet of a cardiac floor, monitors keeping their soft green time, which, if you have ever heard it, is the sound of a building full of strangers refusing to let people die tonight. He was awake. The good eye found me and held. And I did the thing, friends, that our family never once did in my hearing in 56 years. I told him the truth, slowly, at eye level, like he was a grown man entitled to the contents of his own life. I told him where Cedar Ridge was and why, that I had chosen it myself in January, that his room would face east because he has turned his chair toward the sunrise my whole life. I told him I would be there Tuesdays, every Tuesday, that his medications would pass under my eye before they passed his lips, and that nothing about him would ever again be decided in a hallway he was not in. I told him about the shop, the workbench, the wall of clocks, and I told him about the safe and the folder and the signature because he was her brother-in-law and her friend once, and he had earned the truth even this late, and especially this late. He listened with his eyes on the ceiling, and his good hand came across the blanket and took mine and gripped hard, the grip of a man who tested every jack before he trusted it with a car. His mouth worked. Speech mostly gone, the chart said, and the chart was right, but charts do not have a field for what a man has been saving up for 43 years. It came out in pieces, hauled up one at a time, half air. Verna never took it. I knew. The clock. Colleen. Look in the clock. His grip held on through the whole sentence and after it, like a signature. And friends, I want to be honest about what I felt, because it was not triumph. It was grief with the lights finally turned on. He had known. Behind that window on the landing, in that recliner, through 43 Christmases and one niece's christening, he was not permitted to mention my father had known, and had kept the peace, which I am still learning is what cowards and hostages both call it, and the difference between those two words is the work of my remaining years. I stayed until he slept. Then I drove 30 miles north through the dark with 4 words riding in the cab like a passenger. Look in the clock. Here's where I would love to tell you I turned around, marched into Linden Street, and pried it open that night. But you know my family now. I did it the correct way, friends, the way that holds up, because I have spent a career watching truth get thrown out of rooms on technicalities. I waited 3 weeks until my father was settled at Cedar Ridge, window bed, facing east, and then it was Sadie, bless her forever, Sadie who texts me like a person, who carried it out of the house in a laundry basket under 2 towels because she said Grandma told the aunts she was finally getting rid of Verna's bad luck clock when they repaint the living room, and Aunt Colleen, I figured it should go to the family clocksmith. The family clocksmith. 56 years in that family, friends, and my correct job title arrived by text message from a 24-year-old. It sat on Verna's workbench, my workbench, for a full day before I could touch it. Walnut case, brass face, stopped at 10 past 2, the monument my mother had kept to a theft she committed herself, dusted weekly for 43 years like a saint's relic in a house bought with the offering plate. And then I did what my aunt taught me at that same bench when I was 11, with a wall of stopped clocks bearing witness. I opened the back. The movement was gummed with half a century, but that is not what stopped it, friends. What stopped it was interference. Something wedged between the weight chains and the case wall, wrapped in a lady's handkerchief, gone yellow as October, tied with kitchen string. I unwrapped it with tweezers, over a towel, with my heart going like a watch losing its bearings. A ring, a thin gold band with 3 small diamonds, old European cuts, 1940s work, and inside the band, an engraving worn soft but legible under the loop. E. Period. To R. Period. 1948. Edwin to Rose, my grandfather to my grandmother, friends, her wedding ring. The ring I would learn from the eldest aunt within the week that vanished the season my grandmother was dying. The ring both sisters were told would go to whoever stayed and did the nursing. The ring my mother tore that house apart hunting for in 1982. The missing inheritance she pointed to for 43 years as proof of what her sister was. Nobody stole it, friends. Rose hid her own ring in her own wedding clock in her last confused winter, the way failing minds squirrel their treasures, and then she died, and the clock stopped being wound because the family was at war, and the war was fought over a theft that never happened, of a ring that never left the living room. It sat 8 feet from my mother's chair for 43 years, through every Christmas, through Verna's erasure, through my christening, my wedding, my divorce, my father's silence, my boxes on the porch, 10 feet from the deadbolt, ticking distance from everybody. I sat at that workbench, friends, and I laughed until I cried, and then I cried without any laughing in it for my aunt, who kept receipts for a crime and never learned there had also been no ring, and for my grandmother, who hid her treasure and took the map with her. And yes, all right, for my mother, 23 years old with a bedpan and a promise, hunting a ring that was in the room the whole time. Every single piece matters, Verna told me at that bench, 45 years ago. There is no such thing as a spare part in a clock. Whoever told you different was building something else. So here is what I did, and I understand some of you will want to argue with me in the comments, and I welcome it, friends. That is what the comments are for. I cleaned the movement. I rebushed the worn pivots with my aunt's tools, by her shadow board, over 3 patient evenings, the way she would have. And when the mantel clock struck its first 10 past 2 in 43 years in her shop under her roof, I wrapped the ring in new tissue, and I had Frankie drive me the 30 miles, and I knocked on the door my key no longer fits. My mother opened it to the end of the chain, 4 inches. Old habits. I did not ask to come in. I held the tissue through the gap, and I said, "It was in the clock, Mom. Nobody stole it. It was in the clock the whole time. It is yours. You were the one who stayed and did the nursing. Whatever else is true, that part was always true, and somebody should finally pay you what was actually owed, in the actual currency. Just once, so you know what it feels like." And I put her mother's wedding ring into her hand through the 4-inch gap, and I said, "Good night, Mom," and I walked back to the truck, and Frankie drove us home with the radio low, and did not say one word the whole way, which is Frankie's love language. And by now, friends, I am fluent. There has been no apology. I want to be square with you because this channel does not sell miracles. My mother has never called to take back the sentence about having one child, and I have stopped standing at the mailbox of that particular hope, but the eldest aunt tells Sadie, who tells me, that the ring is on her hand, that she wears it to church, and that when a woman at coffee hour asked about it, my mother said, "It was my mother's. It was lost a long time ago, and my daughter found it." My daughter. Present tense, friends, singular possessive, in public. I am an adjuster. I know a partial payment when one arrives, and I know better than to mistake it for the balance, and I have decided at 56 that I can hold a small true thing without demanding it become a large one. That is not weakness. That is just accurate bookkeeping, finally, and the only set of books I still keep. My father lives at Cedar Ridge now, window bed facing east. I am there every Tuesday, and some Saturdays with Sadie, who paints his nails outrageous colors because it makes the aides laugh and him prouder than a rooster. I bring the tapes. One a visit, played on Verna's little recorder on his tray table, his old friend's voice filling the room, telling my birthdays back to both of us, and he listens with his eyes shut and his good hand around mine, gripping at the same places every time. The drive-bys, the honor society, the harness tape, That one he gripped so hard the aide looked over. He was in the house while it all happened, friends. He let the story stand for 43 years. The tapes say what my aunt saw, and his grip says what he knows, and I have decided that both of those get to be true in the same room, because that is what free love costs, and I pay it gladly, every Tuesday. My mother visits Sundays. The staff worked out the choreography inside a month, 2 shifts, no overlap, nobody ever had to say it out loud, and if you think that is sad, friends, you are right, and if you think it is peace, you are also right. Most true things are both. Barry has the Linden Street house and the mortgage inside it, which is its own sentence. Self-imposed, no parole board required. He came by the shop once in the spring, stood around the doorway with his cap in his hands the way men like Barry stand when the account is overdrawn everywhere else, and finally said, "So this is really yours, huh?" And I said, "No, Barry, it is really ours. Mine and hers." And he looked at the wall of clocks a while, and then he left. And I do not know yet what that visit was, friends, but I noted the date in the log, because in this family you keep the record first and find out what it means later. Sadie comes Saturdays. She is learning the trade, and she is dreadful at it, so far in a way that would have made Verna hide the good tweezers with great love. And 3 weeks ago, she got her first movement running solo, a junk drawer West clocks, and when it started ticking, she teared up. 24 years old, over a $3 alarm clock, and I had to turn around and reorganize the shadow board for a minute. The pattern needed a next believer. Friends. It just ran out of them. Frankie is here Sundays. She brought her own mug in April and left it, which from Frankie is a deed of covenant. And we do the crossword out loud in the front window while the shop clocks argue around us. Because I wound them, friends, all of them, my first week here. Verna said a ticking clock in an empty room is a lie. The room is not empty anymore. The shop reopens Saturdays only, for now. Bennett Clock and Watch, repairs while you wait, same tinted sign, freshened by a kid from the high school who charged me $40 and underpriced himself, and I paid him $90 and told him why, and I let the county make of the reopening whatever it likes. The Bennett name over that door was never the problem. It just spent 43 years on the wrong side of the story. And the mantle clock, friends. The clock lives on my mantle now, upstairs, over the stove that still smells faintly of cedar, and it keeps honest time, striking the hours over a shop full of rescued movements, and every Sunday night, last thing, I wind it. That is my liturgy now. Not the porch, not the boxes, not the 4-inch gap. Just a woman in her aunt's kitchen, winding her grandmother's clock, on her own schedule, in her own name. They kept a stopped clock for 43 years as evidence against an innocent woman. I keep it running as evidence of something else. That nothing in this story was ever actually broken, friends. Not the clock, not my aunt, not me. We were only unwound, all of us, some by grief, some by greed, some by 56 years of being the responsible one. And unwound, my aunt would want me to tell you, is a fixable condition. So here is the whole inheritance, friends. Everything in the floor safe, handed to you for free, the way it was always meant to be handed. Any love that arrives with an invoice is not love, it is billing, and you are allowed to dispute it. Keep your own records in your own hand, at your own address, because the story about you will be written by whoever holds the pen, and the pen is worth more than the house. And if they ever stack your life on a porch in labeled boxes, take the boxes. Take them, and go find out who has been keeping a key warm for you all these years. Because somebody has, friends, I promise you. Sometimes it is an aunt, sometimes it is a locksmith at a folding table with cocoa. Sometimes, for a long stretch, it is only you at 3 in the morning refusing to sign the surrender. That counts. That has always counted. You were never the spare part. Whoever told you that was building something else. Thank you for sitting with me all the way to the end of this one, friends. Tell me in the comments what your family's stop clock is, the thing nobody whines and nobody explains because every house has one, and I read every single comment with my morning coffee at the workbench. If this story kept you company tonight, the like button tells me so. And if you want to be here when I open the next file, subscribe and ring the bell. Because I am 56, I have 36 tapes and a floor safe, friends. We are nowhere near done. It is late now. The clocks are arguing softly downstairs, the ridge wind is at the shutters, and in a minute I am going to make tea and win the mantle clock, because it is Sunday. 2:10 comes around twice a day now, friends, and it is just a time again. That took 43 years. Good night from Depot Street to your kitchen. Wind yourself, keep your own time.